Greetings and welcome to the Upper Pen Podcast. My name is Dakota, and today I'm talking with Neil Hellegers, actor, narrator, all-around cool dude. I know Neil best as the voice of Montana Cogshall and Clyde Hatchett of Eric Ugland's Good Guys and Bad Guys series. Neil captures the funny and the harrowing. Montana and Clyde are lucky to have such a talented narrator. Neil, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that. I'm lucky to have them, is how I see it.
It's pretty great because Eric has a pretty wide range of emotions in his books.
Yeah, it's he gets the pathos in there and he gets the humor in there, and I love his dialogue is just fantastic. And I appreciate that he's built a world where it's gamelit and there's that kind of going on, but there's also an irreverency to that as well too, and that kind of all the characters, and there's a fun when I get a new book and I go to him, I know he always has very specific ideas about every single thing in there, but he's also we'll also sort of arrive at, like in Wild Wild Quest, we're like, what kind of Western world is this, and to not make it a typical Western world. And he had a lot of ideas and was willing to kind of hear some of my input as well too, and I think we arrive at a good thing together. Yeah.
How did you get started narrating? We'll go back to the beginning real quick.
Sure. I have I was been acting for a while in a professional capacity, and that took on a kind of a variety of forms. Coming out of college and then grad school, I did mostly stage theater, a lot of Shakespeare, by and large, and some other like downtown New York theater as well too. And then that kind of morphed, and I was kind of like wanting to start a family. That was sort of an unsustainable lifestyle for me, and so in terms of being out of town a lot and things like that. So I shifted from that work into doing on-camera work, which was largely the form of commercial work. A lot of goofy dad stuff. As you said, you saw some of those clips. It was Modern Family was very popular at the time. So every commercial wanted like the dumb dad, and the mom was like, well, here's the product, you idiot. So I did a lot of that kind of work, but even that was it was good. It was sort of inconsistent, and it's the nature of that work. You never know what your next gig is going to be. And so I decided I wanted to kind of supplement that with narrating. And I had always listened to audiobooks for years over long drives, back to the day of back to records when I was a kid, but to the day of the big binders of cassette tapes and then CDs. And so I did that thing that, people do to narrators, a lot of people have done to me. And I always try to be very generous about this because a friend of mine from grad school is a very successful narrator. I said, hey, can I take you out to coffee and pick your brain? I did that, and she was very kind and very generous to do that. I kind of owe her everything really in that respect. And I kind of slowly worked my way into it in terms of getting coaches and workshops to kind of use the skill set that I had from my acting training and experience to kind of commute that into audiobook work. I did the thing in the closet for a long time in the apartment I was living in, didn't breathe oxygen for a while, made that work, learned the tech, slowly always trying to improve, always trying to get better at my work, while also trying to kind of set up work that I wanted to do. I always read sci-fi and fantasy, so it made the most sense to kind of work in that realm. And then I'm also a gamer, so GameLit kind of came early on in that respect as well too. Also the advantage of, on a practical level, GameLit is usually series based. So you get one book, you're getting a handful of books. So that seemed like a good way to market myself and kind of a smart move. And also, again, like the kind of books that I wanted to do. So, it's the game. It was building a completely separate list of contacts from what I knew in my other acting work, and getting to know people. And the audiobook community is a fantastic, generous community. And it's, we're in a time still seems perpetually, knock on wood, in this sort of period of growth. So there's a lot of available work if you know how to kind of get it. But I just kind of started building the thing and building more contacts and more and just always kind of trying to do better. I have this sort of thing where if it's the book that I'm currently working on, I feel confident about my work. But if it was like a year ago, I listened to it, I'm like, oh man, I could have done that better. And I'd rather I have a weird combination of imposter syndrome and confidence and of that. But I feel like I use that imposter syndrome to always make sure that I'm never getting complacent and always trying to make my craft better and always trying to do the books the best service possible and for the listeners and make that experience as good for them as possible.
That seems like a very good response. I don't know where I was going with the beginning of that sentence.
Seems. Yeah.
Right.
It's all a lie. It's all a lie. I just made that up entirely. So I did a lot of improv. No, actually, that's one thing I never did a lot of, was a lot of like improv. It's kind of, someday perhaps, but I never did like organized improv, just scenic improv. Commercial auditions and commercial acting actually has a lot of improv in it. But anyway.
You do seem very funny in the audiobooks that I've listened to, so I'm surprised that there's not a lot of improv in your background. So.
Well, I think, a lot of things like, what's the thing about, what's the phrase exactly? It's like, drama is difficult, but comedy is harder, I think a lot of it is helped by like having a funny book, of course. That's like, I can't do anything without that. And maybe I always try to milk the humor for everything. Even I think the most serious thing is made better by wrapping it in humor or surrounding it or putting it or contextualizing it in some way with humor. I think, again, like those, you saw it in those clips, like the commercial acting is like, it's often very scant. Like you get on set and they're like, here's what you want you to do. And you'll do 30 different versions of it until they choose the one thing that they want. And that's the whole day. That's the 30-second spot. Right. But they'll spend a whole day on it because the client will be like, something different. So it was kind of incumbent upon me to come up with multiple different versions of being the silly dad or whatever it might be. So, I guess that's all a way of saying that I try to be funny. I don't often succeed. I don't always, oftentimes I don't succeed. But that's my goal anyway.
So you take on a lot of different types of books. So it seems like you have a lot of game lit, but you also do nonfiction and contemporary fiction. So how do you get prepared for these vastly different books?
The way I always kind of look at that, nonfiction is in a slightly different sense is different from any other all fiction, partially because of the topicality and the structure of it. It doesn't tell a story in the same way. Sometimes it does. But I always think of it in a way. I think of like, if I'm doing nonfiction, I think of myself as playing the character of this author who cared so much about this topic that they wrote a whole play about it. And if it's not necessarily always in first person, but that's who I'm kind of playing, or that's who I'm inhabiting in that. Aside from that, there's a sort of an adage among narrators and among coaches that whoever this person is, whether it's Montana or whatever, they don't know that they're in a gamelet. So-and-so doesn't know that they're in a mystery or a thriller or something. And so I always kind of try to honor whatever that author is giving me, and I try to think of that more than the genre. But a lot of that comes down to the same acting process that I would do for anything else. It's like I try to have be a process of discovery for the main character that I'm inhabiting. Even if it's third person, usually third person has some amount of informedness to it, and you're in that person's head, even if it's third person, and I let that affect my pacing of delivery for the narration, even if it's third person. I always just kind of try to tell the story and then let the book take its own form. I don't have to create the game litness of it. That's going to kind of take care of itself. That being said, there are some aspects of the genre that people make expectations towards, and I think that my tendency, for example, voice work in game lit, the expectation is for it to be a little more elaborate, but I take that same sensibility to urban fantasy or to contemporary fiction. I also kind of like doing voices, and I like the notion of those voices being distinct, but I also like the idea of two voices being distinct from each other, not because one is like a high-pitched British accent and the other is a gravelly, former Navy SEAL dude, but because because it's the scene, it's their circumstances dictate how they sound, and that's what makes them sound different, as much as all those other kind of trappings as well too. I feel like if I'm not doing game lit, I feel like I give myself a little more permission to not have to be animation level voice acting, but when it's when it's good guys and a certain character shows up like Mr. Paul, like he has to be consistent and he has to have an acumen to him that sets him apart from everyone else in various ways. But then again, it always comes, no matter, I'm making choices based on what the author is giving me, and in that case, Eric gives me so much. In terms of those long, Mr. Paul scenes are all they're all dialogue scenes. They're all, And so for that, it's the back and forth and the and for that, that's pure acting objective work. That is, what does Mr. Paul want to get out of Montana, or spoiler, Clyde, or the other way around. What do they want out of this god, or how do they achieve that? That's the same no matter what. And in a way, nonfiction is that thing, except the listener is the scene partner. I want to convince someone of, I did a book about various assaults on constitutional rights. That author was very concerned and very wanting to impart to the listener, to the reader, or whoever it might be, that this is important, this is vital, this is something that's changing in our society that they need to be aware of. That's the objective. That's the same as whether I was doing Shakespeare, whether I was a dad trying to, sell a product, or whether it's Montana, Clyde, or whomever. So it all comes back to the same thing. And then it takes on these wonderful forms based on what the author gives me to play with.
So a lot of the work that's in Gamelit is either a very small publishing house or self-published. Mm-hmm. So I imagine there's a different expectation between somebody like Eric Ugland versus, like, you did a Joyce Carol Oates book. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very contemporary, very like highbrow literature, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think, well, in that particular case, for example, Eric's books are published through Tantor, who's a company that I've worked for. They're one of the first audiobook companies I worked for. So I have a long history of working with them. I understand their work process. I know what their sort of expectations are. It's very easy with that Joyce Carol Oates book. I feel like that's the one that I wish I could go back and redo, because I feel like it's happened to me before when it's like, oh, I really love this book. I really want to make it the best I possibly can. Like, I'm far more prone to kind of like put too much or to kind of whiff on a book at the same time when I really like, this is special. And so the trap I've tried to get out of is thinking of anything as being whether it's no matter what publisher it's from, if it's from Big 4, 5, 3, 2, 1 these days, pub, or whether it's independent, I'm working directly for the author, or whether it's Tantor, is to try to give them all the same weight. And that's also to say, like, to not be too precious with any of them. I've come to find that when I get precious and overwrought, that's when I don't do my best work that way. Not that I have to like pretend to not care, or that I don't care, or that I'm not invested, but there's a difference between being over to putting too much weight into something, and that ruins it for me. Or it makes it harder, because I'm weirdly, like, I make more pickup errors when that's the case, because I'm so absorbed in something else that's not the thing that I should be absorbed in. Not that pickups is a reflection of the quality, but I take it as an indication that there's something off about it for me. When I get a lot, that I'm not as connected to it as I should be, or I'm trying to force it to be something else that it's not. Yeah. So so while I'm, always working to do more, better books, I always try to, no matter what it is, even if it's a book that I'm like, this is not my favorite book, but I'm going to find the thing in here that is the part that I do love, and kind of make it about that. And that's going to be true for anything. It makes it easier if the book is fantastic, but that's not always the case. But it's the same. That's any actor's job with any gig, is that you take it and you mine it for the nuggets that appeal to you the most, and you make that the thing that you're doing.
I get that feeling of like trying too hard on the things that you really, really care about. Because like with like you're one of my favorite narrators. So now I'm super nervous, but now I want to do really good, right?
Well, we're all doing great here,
So
best to not care too much about me. Just mistreat me, and then it'll be a fantastic interview.
Just ignore you.
Yeah, pick up that Zadie Smith from behind you and start reading, and then it'll be like, oh, that's an interesting choice for an interview.
Oh yeah, let's just do some.
I am looking
Northwest.
At your bookshelf. Yes, this is true. Yeah, I mean, you're in front of it, so
Well, yeah. I mean, my office is relatively small, so. So with fantasy and Gamelit in particular, there's a lot of random kind of not real words, right? So how do you go about deciding how you're going to say Voldrani or whatever it happens to be in that book?
I kind of like there's two components of that. One is that, like, usually I can ask. If it's, I'm usually pretty clear. Like, there's, an ambiguity in pronunciation. Sometimes there's really no ambiguity, even if it is a made up word. It's like, it's pretty much going to be that. But I do always assemble a list as I go along of words that are part of the world. If I don't happen to have access, it's relatively rare that I don't have the ability to ask someone, or there'll be like, well, make your best guess. We trust your judgment. I try to create some kind of system by which, the names of all the names from a certain culture, for example, I try to make it so that there's some kind of cultural continuity with the way those words are pronounced, like emphasis on the first syllable rather than the second or third. Like, a lot of languages have that kind of component. But usually I can ask. I mean, to use the current example, Eric always knows exactly. There's like one or two times he's like, yeah, I don't know, do your best here, or he'll trust if I didn't and I just make a call on something, I never like hear from him about it, but I always send him a list because I know he's got something in his head, and I always kind of want to sort of stick with that. He also has a tendency to throw things in to kind of try to mess me up a little bit. So I always kind of make sure to be like, what is this, sir? But it's usually, and then after that, it's really more about being consistent. Whatever choice I make, it just has to be the same. And I've not always been fantastic about that, but in my bank of characters, I take a little clip of each character so I can keep their voice consistent. If it's some key word that I know I'm going to have to come back to, I'll try to take a clipping of that as well too, just so I have it as a reference. The book that I'm working on now, the author has submitted a pretty great extensive list of all the names and pronunciations, and so I have him saying them in MP3 so I can refer to them if I need to as well too. So he saved me that work of making my own clip, I guess. But authors usually do. They usually have an idea in their head about what their made up, beasts and names and cities sound like.
That makes a lot of sense. With the voice clips that you do, I've always wondered how you keep track of certain voices, because some of these series are many, many, many books. And you might see a character in book 3 that doesn't come back up until book 12. So
I always try to be like, I mean, on one hand, like, I try to keep a pretty consistent library of names of voices for each series, and that file it's a folder that I keep alongside the other ones, and they're all small WAV files, and that can kind of grow and grow. Usually, if someone comes up and then goes away again, I'll have given them a unique voice. It is also possible for me it takes a little more time, and I'll have the previous text from the previous books to find that name and then seek it out in my old files. The only time that's a difficulty, and this doesn't happen as much anymore because people aren't recording in studios, is if it's, the first book in a series was in studio, and then the other one, and then the latter ones aren't. It's happened to me where I did the first book of a series and then the second one was in studio. And so I had to be sure to be armed with as many voices as possible from the first one, dropped as sound files into my PDF, into my script. So I could be like, that's what he sounded like, because I won't have the luxury of going back through my files, which would be at home. But yeah, I've gotten better at that as time's gone on. Like, I look at some older series and I'm like, ooh, I didn't really, recently I've been working on a series called Reality Benders, Michael Adamanoff, and it's from Magic Dome, and it crosses over with Reality Benders later. It was like, it happens slowly. I'm like, that name sounds familiar. Oh, I see what's happening here. It crosses over with another series called Perimeter Defense, which was one of the first Gamelet series that I worked on 7 years ago. And so I went back to I save everything. I always compress and save everything on old hard drives, and so I pulled that one out and listened to it and pulled out. I'm like, oh, I didn't take many clippings here, but I still had all the files. So the people I didn't have, and it was only a few main characters, so it wasn't that many, I was able to dig and kind of find out and cringe listening to my 7-year-old narration and be like, oh. But it was very gratifying. It was very, very gratifying to go back to my first Gamelet and kind of cross it over with my most current Gamelet as well too. So it was actually like immensely satisfying. So worth the time to dig out some of the other characters for that reason.
It seems like you put a lot of time and effort into each book that you do. But then there's people like Travis Baldry who mentioned that he doesn't have the time to do that. So do you think that your narration is better for giving it the kind of care that you do?
I mean, as I understand it, we have pretty similar schedules in terms of like book a
Oh,
week kind of a thing, you know.
yeah.
I think that, uh, I don't know if, I mean, my process is my process because that's what's worked for me, and what other people do is kind of what works for them. But I'm like I said, I wish I had more time. I oftentimes don't. That's kind of the or I construct my schedule such that if something happens, like a day of illness or something, it throws me for weeks. But I, unless it's a longer book, in which case I will straddle it over 2 or 3 weeks if it's, I usually average about 12 to 15 hours a week, or I can do 12 to 15 finished hours a week. But that's the schedule I give myself. That's how I'm like maximizing my output, by packing things in as kind of tightly as possible. It's not great, and it's going to kill me. But yeah, I think my deliberation and process is what I require, and other people have other processes, and but I do try to keep busy, and that's kind of why I mean, like I say, I do to myself, but I specifically got involved in this work because I wanted to try to develop a working career where I was packed, where I have that consistency of schedule, and I have bookings consistently, into the future, that gives me a reliability and a pattern that I can budget, like a household budget, for like the family things that I can rely upon, and try to, make the most of it. But I put limits on that. Like, I don't usually record at night unless I'm in a crunch, unless I have to. I try to keep it into daytime recordings, and I also try not to record on weekends. I'll read and prep books at nighttime for, like, my next book is usually, that's the way it works. I'll read the book at night that I'm recording the following week or the week after that, and for a few hours on the weekend. But I also try to take at least a day to not do that. That's how I actually probably keep myself from dying, in order to do that. So, but like I work hard, but I put limits on it, and I try to. I have to. I mean, I recognize that it won't work if I burn myself out, or if I destroy my voice or something like that. So I always try to maintain my health, and my regimens and hydration and all that kind of stuff, so that I
It
don't.
seems like you guys do so much work, and it feels like people don't realize maybe how much work goes into being a narrator. So
It's labor intensive, of all the voice artist work. It's certainly, I think it's the marathon. We're the marathoners, not just because we get paid less than a commercial voiceover or a SAG actor, but we all work really hard, and I think that's kind of what our community is really strong, because we all recognize that in each other, and it's like game recognizes game, and I see that in Travis. I see that in a lot of great narrators. We're all working really hard, and we're all again, right now it's at the place where, like, I think this is particularly in Gamelit, like, the better all of the Gamelit narrators are, the better the genre is, the better the listening pool is, the better the whole experience becomes. And so we're really good, I think, at kind of celebrating each other. And it's like we're all so busy, like there's not it's absent some kind of competition in that sense, but it's we all we all support each other to lift each other up, to lift ourselves up, to lift the authors up, to lift the community up as well too. And I think in Gamelit, it kind of it's that's true for a lot of the industry, of the audiobook industry, and a lot of narrators as well too. Gamelit is kind of like, it's actually not dissimilar in some respects from romance. The romance narrators have a similar kind of thing going, where they have all worked together, because there's so much duet and multicast collaborations happening in romance, that they all work with each other in various ways, but they all support each other. And in general, narrators have gotten better about advocating for each other and ourselves, and that shows itself up in groups. It shows itself up with PANA, Professional Audiobook Narrators Association, and that is all these organizations that we're trying to create for ourselves, that structure trying to create for ourselves, to help each other, to advocate for better standards in terms of pay, in terms of structure and expectations, and our relationship with the publishers, with it, and with listeners, and with the unions and all that as well too. So we're all working hard to work harder, but we're trying to do it in a way that's smarter and better and more productive and supportive.
It seems like you have to wear a lot of different hats when you're a narrator too, because you've worked for a bunch of different companies, and I don't know if you're contracted with anyone specifically right now.
Not in a retainer kind of a way,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, the very few, I mean, I think Podium is the only one that has that kind of arrangement happening with their contributors. Most everyone else, it's all you become a independent contractor for, you know, we're all small businesses essentially, you know, and so yeah, I just that's been the name of the game has always been about like always trying to for me, trying to work with a different publisher whenever I can, you know, in order to expand that pool of potential opportunities and books and things like that too. So the different, yeah, you're definitely right. A narrator needs to be, aside from just the narrating work itself, which is divided into a few hats between narrator and director. You have to be on top of your tech. That's another hat. You have to be on top of your promote your own promotion. That's another hat. You have to be, you know, participant in the community. That's another hat. If you do coaching or other kind of stuff, that's another hat as well too. You know, it's all the different things that go into a business when you're the sole employee and secretary and, you know, janitorial staff. So let's like you do everything. You know everything. But that's true for acting in general. You know. Though it's potentially, you mean the idea of repertory companies has kind of gone away from this country, but unless you're contracted for a series or something like that for a number of episodes, you know, which is sort of the case. I mean, like I mentioned series before, like when you're signing on to one, you're kind of signing on to all of them, ideally. But it's still like, you know, I still view it as kind of like I'm working from book to book to book. Like this is the book that I'm doing now. Then I'm going to shift focus to the next one and to the next one and just kind of try to keep it going until I die.
Don't die.
No, I won't. I'm trying not to. Desperately trying not to.
So one of the hats that you seem to wear is producer too. So not only are you directing your own work, but you have to produce it too?
With, I mean, it depends. It's different with, that more happens with if I'm doing working with an author or, you know, it's kind of an indie book of some kind. Not always the case. Sometimes it's, you know, I'm making direct contact with an author, and so I'm the one bringing the book to. I'm recording the book. I'm communicating with the author about what they need, but then I'm also I'm the one who's contacting the engineer and who will proof and do all that kind of work, and I'm the channel between those. Sometimes even in an independent way. Like if I'm working on the Michael Chapman's 10 Realms books, if I'm working with Don Chapman, who's the engineer producer for the 10 Realms books, that's who I'm kind of working with as well. It's so that changes the nature of what I do because I'm working with Don to do Mike's books. But I'm also, you know, I'm wearing another number of other hats, but I'm not doing I'm just shipping things to her and she's getting the pickups back to me. So
that's going to be nice not having to worry about that part at least.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and it's also the thing is like as an actor, this is kind of the weird thing. Like as an actor, I like collaborating with people. I'm, you know, I kind of come out of a background where, you know, working in Shakespeare is all about the company. It's all about working and relying on other actors. I mean, it happens when I work on multicasts and sort of here and there kind of randomly and the opportunity to, or a duet or something like that. But generally speaking, I don't have that collaborative experience. But like to use the same example, with if I'm working on a 10 Realms book, I can talk to Don about this moment here or this moment there. So I can have those kind of moments of collaboration. And then we can go back to Mr. Chatfield and be like, what do you think of this? And he'll sign up on certain things. And so that's a form of collaboration. But that's, you know, for independence, that doesn't happen as much, you know, with some smaller presses, it can kind of, it can be that way, but we're kind of expected to be autonomous by and large narrators. It happened that the grad school that I went to, Trinity Rep, which is in Providence, one of the things that my teachers there talked a lot about was being not relying upon a director in order to do the work, about making choices and self-generating a lot of the work, and if you get to work with a director and then they can give you good input, that's wonderful. But you shouldn't wait for that before making choices about stuff. And so that perspective happens to work, I think, really well for audiobooks, where I'm very rarely working with a director, and even then it's not the kind of direction that's like scenic direction where there might be suggestions happening. If it's just dialogue multicast, they can be more on kind of moment to moment with you, but I have to generate all that kind of work myself, and so it's a comfortable place because of that training, and of course it's just sort of what you get used to. But by and large, even when I'm working with Dawn or Michael or whomever, most of the work is still me by myself. Unless I'm live recording, which is a whole weird other thing, but in which case you're being looked at by people. But that also feels like that's like a third other thing, live recording versus recording by myself. I've been doing forays into it. I don't love live recording. I don't dislike it, and I think it has there's a strong value to it, and I enjoy doing it sometimes. It's just that it feels like a different exercise to me. If I know that I'm being watched, I know that it's like I feel like a different set of muscles automatically get engaged with me when I know I have an audience. And I'm not saying the work is better or worse. It just feels different. And so I just kind of note that difference. I'm like, all right, well, if I want a different insularity, then I won't do a live. But if I want a little bit of kind of different energy to it, then maybe I'll try it for certain parts of it, or coming back from lunch or something. But actually more like more like in the morning. I'll be more inclined to do a live like when I get into the booth first, when I'm fresh, rather than later in the day. But yeah.
Do you miss working with people though? I mean, it's got to be such a dramatic change when you first started. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I always keep saying, I was talking to a friend about this weekend. I've stopped doing theater by and large. Of course, like the past couple of years has not been a great time to be doing theater at all. But and so I consider myself and the choices that ended up being made very fortunate that it's true for all narrators, of course, that we had these COVID jobs when the rest of the industry really did shut down. And so I wouldn't change anything for that. I have no regrets in that respect. But that maybe I'll get back to doing theater someday. I would love to. I'd love to do a Shakespeare play again. It's been a long time since I've had to memorize that many lines. But I do, because I always feel like the collaborative experience is always like, it's not that anyone is not able to be as much of an artistic individual. It's that the sum is greater than its parts kind of a thing. Working collaboratively with great artists challenges you and expands the possibilities and provides choices that you would never have the opportunity to make if you were doing both sides of the dialogue by yourself. I do miss it, and I do hope to get back to it at some point. And whenever I do get to do a multicast, it's sort of like, we all have these theater backgrounds, and so we all have the same kind of like, oh my gosh, we get to act with other people, even if it's via like this, that's as the form it usually takes. Right before the last book I did before shutdown was a multicast at Audible, and it was ridiculous too. We also got there, we all came off the subways from New York City, where we know now it's like COVID was like swirling all over the place, and we get to the studio, we're like, oh, we have hand sanitizer, we're fine. And like meanwhile we're like talking in this large but still enclosed studio with all these other people, and thankfully everyone was fine. But we got about halfway through that multicast, and then they're like, we're shutting down the studios for 2 weeks. So we're like, oh, okay. But then years later, of course. So I always think of that in terms of like the last book of the before was this wonderful multicast in this beautiful studio with a great group of people and a great project, and then it all came tumbling down. So there'll be more multicasts. I do hope to get back on stage at some point. And of course, there's also film projects, which is very much akin to the same kind of collaborative energy that can happen. Not quite the same. Like my heart will always be in theater production and stage acting, and whether it's Shakespeare or something more contemporary or experimental. I do miss it, and I try to, like, if I'm alone here in the booth, I try to capture that sense when there's the dialogue by, trying to surprise myself, and trying to be open to impulses as they occur to me as they arrive from the book. I'm collaborating with the book. I'm collaborating with the author, even if they're not in the booth with me, which would be tight. So, yeah.
I really like the way Jeff Hayes does his sound booth stuff, where there's like a variety of people on his casts. I think that's really interesting for like a radio play type audiobook.
Yeah.
So would you ever do something like that?
I mean, I have done. I've done, you know.
Oh yeah, you did multi. Yeah.
And it's funny too. It's sort of like, the NATF, the National Audio Theater Festival, is this, it's connected with the festival and the Here Now Festival in Kansas City. I mean, it's been virtual for the past couple of years, but I worked with them a bunch in past years as well too. Usually bringing in weird experimental Shakespeare projects was been kind of like my contribution to that festival. But also what's great about attending that festival is that that's tied into the decades old radio play tradition. So to them, it's kind of fun. And then that festival has been existing for a long time. At some point, they started bringing more and more audiobook because audiobook had this huge ascendancy. And to them, it's hilarious that everyone's like, oh, we're discovering this like multicast full production. And they're like, yeah, we've been doing it for decades. Literally, we've been doing it for 100 years, like we've been doing it forever. And they're like, yeah, so, so that's a great organization of all these people who have been or connected to that tradition of doing it. And Jeff is from Kansas City. He's on the board for NATF or for that as well, or has been. I'm not sure if he still is, but so that tradition is very much connected to that whole experience. There was a whole kerfuffle recently where I don't need to get into the names of it, but a audiobook entity put out a tweet saying, people are trending towards multicast. What will it be like if it replaces the single narrator? And it was upsetting in a way too, and maybe unfounded and whatever. The tweet was taken down. But again, that same kind of thing about like, it's like saying that's trending is like saying that like people are using the phone to talk to each other. Yeah, it's been happening for a long time, dude. Whether it's not a trend if it's always been there. It's always been happening, and in all these different pockets, not necessarily right in the sort of enclave of the industry, where trends occur or trends don't occur, But multicast are lots of fun because it has that kind of collaboration to it. So it's definitely the more of those I can do, the better. And it's a good it does certainly kind of break up the monotony of just me and the book in the room. So in the booth. So
I imagine it's got to be kind of a hard decision though, because you can't take 100% of your profits or whatever like you would normally do by yourself, because it's a whole cast, right?
Yeah, the different companies do different things with that. Audible, if it's a multicast, you get paid by they have everyone sort of present online together, and you get paid like a studio fee, like a by hour. And for if you're scheduled from 1 to 3, you get that times 3. Other places, whatever you contribute audio wise, maybe there's a minimum of one finished hour, but then you get paid for however long your accumulated audio is for just your lines in a multicast. If you're just reading lines of dialogue and maybe some chapters, it's a concern and it's a question because there are so many different standards. Something that PANA and other organizations or other narrators are trying to work for is establishing something consistent. The problem also is that even if it's a SAG contracts are negotiated individually with all these different companies. So there's no obligation to have a single model. Like one model that's been floated, because even if it's a multicast, I still have to read the whole book. I don't just go through read my lines. You need to know what's happening in the entire story. You need to know how it ends, even if you're not there. And so you're basically doing the same preparation as you were for a full book, but then getting paid a percentage of that, which is essentially like taking a massive pay cut for the same amount of work. Some companies that I work for will add in, aside from whatever money, whatever the sort of my final running time is and getting paid by finished hour for that, they'll put in another finished hour on top of that for prep, so there's efforts now to kind of that's been sort of haphazard to try to seek out what that best standard is and try to advocate for that being applicable to everyone, whatever that best model is. I don't claim to know personally what it is, but that's what we're trying to kind of figure that out and try to make that consistent. So it's not like it's fun to do it, but well, like if I was not doing this, I'd be making more money, which is always true for the same amount of time. Um, that's a shame that that would have to be that case, and it would be great to equalize those things, not so that the full books make less, but so that everyone can kind of make that full due without anyone being compromised in any way.
Yeah, okay. I guess that kind of goes back to like how you've been an actor in a bunch of different things. It must be very similar to that model, I would assume.
Well, I mean, if I was when I was like doing Shakespeare, for example, I would make my Actors Equity weekly pay basically, and that varied depending on what scale of theater you're working at, the size of the theater, where it's located, if it's a tour, if it's in the city, if it's in a regional city. And that in that case, you make not much, but you make what you make per the week. Audiobook, because it's this whole, generally speaking, this finished hour, it incentivizes the narrator to streamline their processes otherwise, so that the total ratio of working hours, including prep and recording, to finished hours is kind of as tight as possible. And that happens naturally. Like if it's, for Eric's books or for other books in a series that I'm familiar with the language, I can get my recording ratio pretty tight. My average is about 2 to 1, 2 hours of working for 1 hour of finished. If I really know the language and I'm really on a flow, I can get that down to 1.5 to 1. But I don't pressure myself to do that. I'm not obliged to do that. I don't want it to be over 2 to 1. And then that's also not taking into consideration prep time, which is its whole kind of, which adds to that as well too. But that's why I kind of schedule my books as tightly as I can. That's how I'm again maximizing my work output, by being as kind of tight and efficient as possible, and while also scheduling myself to, like as mentioned, not kill myself. But also while I'm scheduling out, I try to leave hold weeks, because different publishers will, like from independent books, those are the ones that I've scheduled like into next year. For books from other publishers like New York publishers, Big Four, 321 books publishers, they tend to get in touch far sooner. But everyone's sooner if, so I have to make sure to leave kind of holes in my schedule that can be, I can either spread a book out and not have to do 3 hours a day of a book, and I can be comfortable doing 2 for 2 weeks. But then I leave that opportunity for something else to come in. So there's a lot of that kind of, that's a hat, that scheduling hat is different from the kind of relatively luxurious, like I, show up for 2 weeks of rehearsal, 3 weeks of rehearsal, then we open, and then I got my days free and I do the show every night, and it's and then we go to the bar, that was the life. But in this case, this is the support and the structure that I want out of my career. And so it's worthwhile to me to kind of do that sort of like the intricate dance of fitting all the books together and doing it so that I can get everything done, while giving enough time without crushing things into a schedule, without compressing it too much and doing that book a disservice, while also getting to as many books as I can. I want to get to these books, like right now I'm trying to figure out how to schedule in a Good Guys, because I get them when Eric gets them to Tantor, and then I got to figure that out, and I leave blocks for them because I communicate with authors in advance, like, hey, when's this coming out? When's this coming out? And leave gaps in my schedule that I know that one is coming around, so that it doesn't have to be done in 23 or whatever. So
okay. Huh. So I didn't really think about the scheduling, because it must be really difficult with books not being written yet, but you're going to have like a Good Guys and maybe a Bad Guys, and then like
right. And I can generally know how long those books are going to be, or once I talk to the author about it, they have a sense of how long it's going to be. And even if it's, if it's the difference between 10 hours and 12 hours and 15 hours, it's all something that I can probably do in a week with again, without dying. It's only when it pushes up into the 20-hour range or something like that I know, like, okay, I need a couple weeks for this. And that's not even including prep, which takes a long time. And if that's the case, I need to know that and well enough advance in order to leave that hole, but also that, books are within a series are usually pretty consistent, or the author has an idea. Like Michael Chatfield for the Ten Realms books knew how long, generally speaking, his book 10 was going to be, so that even if we were scheduling that months in advance, I knew how much time to leave for it. Some authors have their stuff together like that in that respect. So.
Okay. I guess that makes it a little bit easier, but then you are also taking on new projects too, right?
Yeah, and I leave some holes for that as well too. Or if something comes in, I'm like, yeah, I can, like my first wave of scheduling is usually very broad. And then the second wave, I'm like, this book will realistically take me 4 days of recording. So this book will take 4 days, but the one after that will take 4 days, but I gave myself a week and a half. So I'm going to layer that in between there so that I can fit that one in between, and get them all kind of done. But if that one other doesn't come in, then it does open up my schedule more to do but usually things layer in, and usually, I just try not to get into trouble in terms of over scheduling myself, and sometimes often fail at that. But like I said, it all gets done.
So can you tell us what new series you're working on? Or...
It's sort of new. It's the third book of it, but it's kind of all come together pretty quickly. It's the one I'm working on today is called it's a series by Kamikaze Potato is the name of the author. Yeah, railroad guy. He's like in that vein, right? It's the third book of a series. It's called Outcast in Another World. It's gamelit. This one's called Rising Insanity. I really love this series. Actually, it's in this typical vein of things, they all have this kind of basic format. In this case, it's a human gets brought into this fantasy world where he quickly learns that he's the only human there. There are elves, there are dwarves, there are all sorts of other cultures of creatures and races and things, because there was a war and the humans all got wiped out. So that's awkward. But it has a really I'm not almost just kind of spoil things, but the way the story develops and the voice of really of everyone is really kind of unique. I always think that it's one of the great things about Gamelit is that there is a rough similarity to a lot of the basic storylines of these things, but it's all about what they do from there. It's all about, and then it's all about the format of the characters and how they interact and how they talk with each other and how the story develops. So I'm very much enjoying this one, and it came in a little longer than the publisher. This is a Podium book anticipated, so I'm like, okay, it's 100K more. Okay, all right, we'll make that work, and then but that automatically my next book is a 10 Realms book. So I'm like looking ahead at that and being like, okay, realistically, how many words is that? That's going to take me this long. So that is what happens. Like, and these are wonderful problems to have. Like, oh, the book is a whole book longer inside the book. But it's kind of like, well, he needed that room to tell a story, and it's a long, it might end up being like 26 hours, I think is what I calculated it being today. But it's not wasted. There's no fluff in there. It's all driven. And I just, there is like, I made a choice for the elves in this because I was kind of, everyone has, all the different cultures have their different language, and this is this third book of the series, and I with the elves for this, I gave them something like a touch of it's almost like it's components from a Scandinavian accent. Elves are always British, right? And so I was like, no, I don't want to do that, and it wasn't supported by the writing of it. It's like all of the toned s's, like is unvoiced, or is becomes, so if someone says where is he going, it's where is he going, so that's a feature of Scandinavian accents, and actually at the same time all v, which is the voice, becomes the unvoiced, which is f. So it's even instead of even, things like that. And so there's a bunch of different dwarf characters, and they all have their different character voices based on who they are. But there's also it's this guy Rob, who's a human. He's like a base, normal general American dialect, or whatever you want to call it. But most of the people he interacts with are these elves. So I'm trying to keep consistent about, and then there's the Dragonkin, and of course, they have this kind of a Slavic, a Czech thing going on, was what I did, not a Russian, but Czech. And there's a whole, I don't, again, this is sort of spoilery, like then there's a whole group that by just turns out for actual reasons speak Spanish, so they all have Spanish accents. But I'm still, I haven't gotten to it yet, and so I think doing a Catalan would be too much, and so I think I'll probably just keep it to a Spanish, not Hispanic, but Spanish accent. So that's kind of how I keep myself entertained, but that's also how I make sure I'm delineating between all these different groupings of cultures and things like that too. But it's worth it because these books are so dang good. So I'm happy to do them. It makes the work a lot lighter to be able to really invest in it in that way.
Are you sure you don't have a degree in linguistics?
No, I don't. I do. I mean, I have a minor in psychology, and that has a linguistics component to it. But this was one of my when I went to grad school for acting, my voice teacher, we would, aside from like vocal support and things like that, which is all a great boon to my, maintaining my voice and vocal quality. He was really good at teaching us not just how to do certain like back pocket accents that you can kind of pull out, but how to learn a new accent when necessary, about what to break down, like how to identify the components, the sound changes, the rhythm changes, the pacing changes, and then apply them with varying degrees of investment, I guess you'd say. Like, like for Scottish accent, if you did a full-on Scottish accent, most people couldn't understand what you were saying. There's a scene in Henry V that's usually called the Four Nations scene, and it's a Welshman, a Scots, an Irishman, and an Englishman, and they're all talking with each other. And the Welshman is very Welsh for the period, and the same thing for anyone else. But the Scots is like, it's a fool, fain. It's like he's barely intelligible. And so every so often I'll, put that kind of into it. But so I'm grateful to have had that background and training so that it helps. Most often it's like, in thrillers and things like that, who are urban fantasy, it's not that I'm creating an accent for a fantasy race. It's, they're Nigerian. I'm like, okay, what is that? How do I discern what that is? And how is it different from Haitian? Like they share a lot of components linguistically, and there are combinations of different accents, and everyone's accent is kind of, unique to their generation as well too. That's a thing. So, but I geek out about these things, and so it's a pleasure for me to be like, ooh, what's that feature, or how am I going to do that there, or what's an archaic, what's like an older dead accent I could possibly use, because that's a whole other category of possibilities. So,
yeah. Well, that's very intense. I couldn't imagine. Well, thank you, Neil, for joining us and giving me the full narrating lessons of.
Sure.
It was great.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about all this stuff.
If you haven't got one of Neil's audiobooks, I suggest The Good Guys or The Bad Guys by Eric Ugland. They're a really good entry into Gamelit. Be sure to check them out. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.